just to revisit this for a second before we get into the actual JRod issues. The type of cells that we were working on were ectodermally derived neurons, the vast majority of the cells that we were working on. They had external cytoplasms.
Yes.
The internal cytoplasms had mitochondria that worked through oxidative phosphorylation the same way as you get ATP production in your cells and in my cells.
Right.
The analog mitochondria in the external cytoplasm outside what we call the median membrane, which was basically composed of vesicles, pockets and vesicles, and then attached to these once were probably nanobacteria, but are now endosymbionts and true organelles. There were true organelles in the cells. They acted as a bioregulatory solenoid that actually trapped hydrogen, the energy from hydrogen coming into the system, and held it almost like a capacitor.
Okay.
And that allowed the JRod to actually store energy in something other than phosphate bonds. We reverted dedifferentiated the neural cells with cyclohexylaminopurines, and it's like that reversing, to turn it to a previous state, almost a stem cell type state, and then differentiated forward again with the use of the appropriate factors to produce neurons, which were then transplanted back into the JRod. The cells in the ectodermally derived cells, on first inspection, if you do cytology, it gave you the appearance, gave you the notion that you were looking at triplets DNA, but these were specific and non-specific cationically bound PNAs, or peptide nucleic acids, and they're peptide nucleic acid oligomers. And the function of these peptide nucleic acid oligomers to the DNA of the cells was not totally understood.
Okay.
I believe, this is a belief without sufficient data, I believe that during the original genetic manipulation of the ectoderm for a retransplantation into a growing embryo, a trophoblast, because they were triploblastic like you and me, I believe that the application of these PNAs, that this is a vestige left over from a triplex DNA that they injected into themselves, that they bioengineered themselves with the ectoderm as a triplex organism, or chimerically triplex organism, and that what was left over, what finally worked, if you will, was something that did not produce a non-Watson-Crick orientation, but something that left us with a Watson-Crick type base pairs and did not leave us with Hughes base pairs. Or triplex base pairs. Because when you, and it's being used now, when you use triplex forming oligonucleotides, you can use these triplex forming oligonucleotides to actually stop transcription. And there is a certain indication that transcription can be stopped as a therapeutic measure to suppress gene function.
Okay.
So if you have a certain gene that you wish to suppress,
that you don't wish expression,
exactly, like a recessive gene of some sort, that there could be a genetic therapy applied to you with the introduction of triplex forming oligonucleotides on certain areas of the strand, which will then cause a gene suppression. It'll cause a kickoff, if you will, of the mechanism for the gene expression.
So it almost sounds as though this was an intentional therapeutic.
Exactly. Everything that, and this is what they didn't want me to say, that everything that we saw leads me to the theoretical conclusion that there was genetic manipulation, that it was not simply adaptive radiation or normal microevolutionary pressures which cause a new physical state, a new phenotype. That its genotype was not changed by virtue of adaptation, that it was changed by virtue of experimentation. And this is something that, again, Kaila acted like it was a strictly a taboo. You know, there are certain things that you would not say, let's say, in the middle of a restaurant, over the table, and it was like one of those subjects. It was socially improper for him to say. We were talking about the end of the Tau 9 conference, which resulted in a disallowance of abductions from the 45s. I think what we're going to do now is just go into the general anatomy of the JRod.
I think that's probably the best.
Right. Well, we mentioned general anatomy and some genetic information. Mentioned the size and the general body plan with one head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, and this is where I am very much allied with the scientific community. And I wonder why more folks, and I don't know what the current consensus is inside of the UFO community or groups concerning the position of several inside of the scientific community, that it would be quite rare indeed to run into a true alien, meaning an alien, an extraterrestrial of non-human lineage, which possesses our same general body plan.
It would be unlikely.
The bilateral symmetry, the location of our head, for instance, the eyes on the head, hands, arms, legs, the appendages, and this lends itself, and I wonder why there hasn't been more. I don't know, maybe there has, but I haven't heard of it. Hasn't been more discussion even before this disclosure of information, that there would be some lineage or some relationship, some genetic or a heritage type of a relationship between we and the so-called Greys, or we and the so-called Orion Talls.
I mean,
the Blondes or Nordics, whatever you'd
there's general similarities that just really can't be ignored unless people just simply think that everybody is going to be based on the same body styling. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, I mean, I would expect to see something maybe radially symmetric rather than bilaterally.
Bilaterally symmetric, yeah.
But on the other hand, the scientific community also indicates that because the Greys and because the other varieties of so-called extraterrestrials are being presented in an anthropomorphic form, that it's simply an act of projection by the people who are making the claims. In other words, they're claiming to have observed something which is familiar to them, rather than something totally outlandish or unfamiliar.
Well, there's so many people that make the same descriptions that have no relationship to one another, that kind of, that explanation kind of falls a little bit.
Well, the general body plan, while the same on a gross anatomical level, there are peculiarities to the anatomy if one goes to a little closer inspection.
Okay.
Of course, the bones are reduced in size. If we're talking about a 52, for instance, the bones are markedly reduced in size, also in density. And it's known that without the correct supplements, and I think even with them, that there's a loss of bone density from our astronauts. So it can give an indication, I think, why there would be a loss of bone density, simply because of the traveling in space or hyperspace, how they actually move from one point to another. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the differences between the 45s and the 52s relative to their skin. The 45s, while they have the early indications of the three basic conditions that we're going to discuss, the IgA MGUS condition, it's called a CIDP-like condition, the Cockayne syndrome, and then the polyneuropathy, the peripheral polyneuropathy. But the skin of the 45s does appear very scaly. Now, by the time you reach the 52s, that scaliness is not so apparent, as there are infections underneath the paps of skin, which are their hyperkeratotic skin, that reveal the problem. And I'm going to get to what the problem is for a moment, in a moment. Under these scaly-like patches are groups of glands. They're compound tubuloacinar type glands, which produce antifreeze proteins and antifreeze glycoproteins. They are associated with sudoriferous glands, which are sweat glands, and also sebaceous glands. But when they're operating properly, there's no distension. So the 45s appear very reptilian-like, and I think that's probably the origin of the so-called reptilians.
Okay, now their skin, the texture of their skin, would you describe it as like a shark type of a skin?
Very leathery.
Leathery, kind of, not scaly as we would assume scales, but
right, but under the pressure of an abduction scenario, which I have some personal accounting, you could easily misinterpret one of them as appearing like a lizard-like creature.
Okay.
Very easily. The very shock, the trauma of going through that and then seeing an organism, what they look like, very easily you would assign something of a familiarity again to it, which would be a reptilian type organism. And the so-called praying mantis variety we're going to deal with coming up as well, it's the same thing, but it's an assignment of a label of where the person's focus is during the time of an abduction or otherwise meeting one of these creatures. Now, from the time that you move from the 45 to a 52, the problems, the three pathologies, I still believe there are two, and I'll go into the reasons, but the three pathologies under which we were attempting to operate, they gradually become more and more prevalent from the 45s up to the 52s. And so the 45s, if you would encounter one, will stand slightly taller than if you would encounter a 52, because there's a loss of muscle function in the 52s, so they have difficulty standing up. So they limp a lot. They're bent over.
They're bent slightly.
Yes, and the prevalence of the CSA and CSB type cockayne involvement causes them to actually lurch forward a little bit and even hold their arms forward a little bit, and that gives the praying mantis sort of appearance that many of the people that have undergone abductions have related. Yeah. And rightfully so. They are relating an actual phenomenon, and they ought to be treated with that degree of consideration, not just passed off as being something which is totally, a fantasy.
Oh no!
Of course, I say that because I've been through an abduction myself, but I mean.
But it's like anything. Somebody sees something that's unfamiliar, they immediately reach for something that's similar to describe it as. It's like, it looks like, it seems as.
Sure, well,
and it's what we naturally do.
Absolutely, we refer to what is familiar.
Right.
And we label things to prior experience, from our prior experiences. The chromosome arrangements in both ectodermal as well as ectodermal, mesodermal, endodermal are the same. So the fusions which have occurred, although the DNA appears different because of the PNA strand problem, although it appears different in the ectodermally derived germ cell layer, the numbers of chromosomes are the same throughout.
Okay.
All right? So you could have some muscle, for instance, and you will have 19 pairs of chromosomes, which is 18 autosomals and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. Mm-hmm. And they are XY as well as XX, male and female. Mm-hmm. And you would have that in the muscle as well as nerve.
Okay.
However, the DNA in the nerve tissue would appear somewhat different, almost like an endoreduplicated or a polytene type chromosome on inspection at metaphase, for instance, through a light microscope. Now, they have undergone 4 believed to be Robertsonian translocations. These are like tandem arm fusions between chromosomes. Now, chromosomes come in different varieties. And without getting, talking about neurocentrics and acrocentrics and all of this business, sometimes there can be an exchange off of arms as chromosomes fuse, because over evolutionary time even, and even you can tell in the population of the living biota on Earth today, there are different numbers of chromosomes depending upon the different species.
Yes.
Well, they have gone through 4 fusions, and it's a fusion between chromosome 4 and 8, 5 and 12, 9 and 13, and 17 and 18. And so they have a total of only 19 pairs of chromosomes, whereas we have our 23.
23.
Right. Now, there's been some question about the second eyelid.
Okay, we've jumped from chromosomes to
Right.
eyes.
Right. Well.
Okay.
I just want to give a good genetic background for what we're dealing with here, because actually, you code for what you become.
One more time.
You code for what you become. We are physically a product, by and large, aside from environmental pressures and other physical pressures on us, we are what our genes have encoded us to be.
Yes.
So I wanted to give people an indication of how many pairs of chromosomes, but just because there are less numbers of chromosomes doesn't mean that they are deficient genetically.
Well, no.
In any way.
Are the chromosomes that have lumped together, are they larger? Are they different sized? I mean, if you have 19 chromosomes instead of 23, have the same amount of material, would it still be in the chromosomes?
Well, in this case, there was some moving out of unnecessary tandem repeats, and that's judging what we learned then against what we've learned since involving the human genome program, but functionally they're the same. Now, if you look at them through a microscope, there are some unusual temporary appearances. There's some temporary cruciform appearances of the chromosomes where they actually look like they're crossed, and that comes and goes. Depending upon the cell you pick up there, they have an excellent variety for the DNA repair process, and so you see it in some of we saw in some of the aspirative avulsions that we did with our needle, our PINS system, which was a pressurized injection system, where we would, I'm going to go through that.
Yes.
But, however, they function normally. They have their anomalies, and I think that because of the involvement of the 5 and the 13 chromosomes having been fused with other chromosomes, that's possibly involved with the turning on of certain aberrant genes.
Okay.
The expression of the cocaine syndrome,
Cocaine
etc.,
syndrome.
may be involved with the fusions, but it's unknown.
Okay.
It was unknown. They were expressing the CSA, CSP type genetic disposition, but we're not really sure whether or not the fusions, the reduction in chromosome number, actually played a part in that or not. They may know now. I don't know. I'm not in the loop now, and since the theory ended. Well, theory started, but the actual application ended in 2003.
Yes.
I'm sure they're still working on it.
Well, yeah, they would have to be.
I've kind of moved on because I'm not directly involved in the project anymore, and frankly, I've done my time.
Yeah, 19 years.
With it. Now, their internal anatomy is very interesting.
Okay.
Talking about thoracic anatomy as well as abdominal anatomy, and I mentioned a little bit about the cranial
Right.
capacity and how the certain sulci are actually moved up and out of the way at the back of the head to make room for this huge complex that almost wraps around their brain like an inner tube, which allows them the telepathic thought and the ability to entrain a normal human. But their thoracic anatomy is very interesting. Their cardiopulmonary system appears to be a single fused mass in the center of their chest. Now, I'm taking this information from the King Tut's, the training update tapes that we had available to us, because I never saw inside of the particular JRod in his chest or his abdomen when actually working with him. There was no surgery performed or anything like that, aside from the aspirative avulsions and then the subsequent therapeutic interventions done by the medics there. But it appears to be thoracic-wise. It appears to be a centralized mass. The heart is not observable directly under the sternum, and it appears to be an overgrowth almost of connective tissue underneath the sternum. The heart then lies behind the large lung mass, which had become anastomosed together. The area below that, the abdomen, has a massively shortened colon. There is a smaller stomach, duodenum, jejunum ileum, the small intestine, and a much shortened colon. And so these statements about them giving off fecal droppings like birds are completely spurious and nonsense. They defecate liquid, and so they regularly require hydration because of the amount of liquid defecation. So they're sipping water all the time, and they require hydration just as we do. The one thing that, moving back up into the thoracic cavity, that is different, aside from what I've already mentioned, is a coating along the side of the lungs. There is an external, an epithelial type coating of a connective and nerve tissue around the lungs, on the two sides of the lungs, and there are alveolar-like sacs which protrude under that epithelial coating, between that epithelial coating and the epithelial coating of the pulmonary tissue itself. Okay. And they impinge into the pulmonary parenchyma. And what they're actually lined with are cells which are almost strictly containing the mitochondria of the solenoid-like mitochondria. And that's the one place where I wanted to do more research there, to try to understand the relationship between the ectodermally derived cells, the neural cells that we had, that we were dealing with, and these particular cells, because although they appeared to be ectodermally derived as well, they shouldn't have been where they were.
Were these the ectodermally derived mitochondrial analogs that had to do with the hydrogen?
Yes.
So they were actually uptaking.
Yeah, it was almost like there was a mini lung function around their lungs, but their mini lung function seemed to be for excess energy storage. So it may have been derived as a result of environmental pressure.
It sounds very reasonable.
But it was very strange to read about and to watch, because I in fact was privy to a dissection on one of the update tapes.
Yeah.
And I do not remember which particular JRod it was. It appeared to be a 45, though a so-called rogue. It didn't appear to be a 52, which was being dissected. So by the time we get to Kaila, he may or may not have had that innovation. That
particular
right
unique feature.
Convention around his lungs, yes. Yeah. Moving up to the down to the feet. There's the feet and arms. There's 4 toes and 4 fingers. The smaller appendage had been naturally selected out over evolutionary time. The small digits.
Actually, this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and there was a spread out of the hands to accommodate surface area. Mm-hmm. And that's all through adaptive radiation, normal evolutionary pressure. So I suspect that should we not go through that catastrophic timeline, that it may happen anyway. There's been speculation about that.
Baby toes.
The hard science, exactly.
Who needs the baby toe?
The eyes are an interesting, the interesting feature on the JRod. They are very large. They contain a nictitating type membrane over the top of the eye. That is the darker portion. However, they're not born that way. There is a social convention that they have adopted where the nictitating membranes are actually surgically added after birth. They're not born that way. And given the fact that we don't follow Lamarckian, I don't even want to go there, but anyway.
Do you have any knowledge of what their eyes are like when they're born?
Yes. They have very large pupils, very large pupillary capacity because of the pressures of living in a low light area, and their requirements. However, they have a tapetum lucidum type apparatus at the back of their eyes, where their retina would be, and that acts very much like a cat's eyes would.
Like a mirrored surface.
A mirrored surface for concentration of light, and the nictitating type membrane, which is added to them after birth, actually further acts to reflect light back, so it concentrates light in a low light environment.
Well, what I was wondering was, you mentioned to have a large large pupil. What about the iris?
The iris is nearly white. It's albino.
It's an albino iris.
Right. So if you peel the nictitating
sclera?
membrane off, the sclera is present. However, it is almost vestigial. It's pushed toward the back of the globe.
Okay.
And that was just a natural innovation from the evolution of living in a low light, yet necessity for concentrating that low light to a perceivable amount type environment.
So
it's present, but it's just not observable.
So with the nictitating covering and the tapetum in the back, it was almost like a double mirror.
Exactly. And so what they do is it's a social convention again. Yes, it assists them in the concentration of the light, but it's giving the eyes of their predecessors to them. It's actually handed down within numerical groups, and then those numerical groups, by sheer numbers and sheer organization, are also within families, because they don't want utilitarian-wise to regard families as being a unit.
A special unit.
Exactly.
So you have a senior member of a numerical group passes on. And is it nictating or nictitating?
It's nictitating. Nictating is an incorrect.
It's nictitating.
It's one of those things that's carried on incorrectly often.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's nictitating.
So the nictitating covering, it's a lens. It's like a cornea.
Yes. It's a several cell thick second cornea almost.
It's like a corneal covering.
Exactly.
That would then be surgically.
It's surgically implanted. You're right, into around their orbicularis muscle, and their corrugator, and one more, but I'm not remembering the particular muscle that it's attached
well,
to.
what I'm kind of getting at is this person who has this surgical adaptation
Yes.
performed grows up, gets older, passes on. Now, that is passed to the next generation.
Or a generation or two past that, because we're
that.
talking about 250, 300-year-old
Peoples.
peoples.
Now, would both of those nictitating lenses be passed along then, so it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker as it goes, or?
Well, it doesn't really get thicker.
Well, if you've got like one from
they're
the
cleaned
grand and then one from this one, and then that's two, then those two get passed to the next?
No. They are surgically implanted with a single one per eye.
Okay.
And no, otherwise they look like
They would get really
Coke bottles.
Coke bottles. It would be kind of.
Yeah, no. They're given one per eye. They're given one per eye, and anything involving eyesight problems or whatever is all surgically taken care of. There are no spectacles.
Glasses.
We'll be getting rid of these as probably within 100 years anyway. I mean, they're going to be gone because of the surgical innovations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm visualizing this, but I must be visualizing it incorrectly, because the way, from your description, the way it sounds, that they would be receiving a nictitating lens, having it implanted, and then, but they would have one of their own because that comes natural. Well, then where did the first guy get the nictitating lens in the first place?
Well, that's the old chicken and the egg.
Well, if it's not a part of the natural part of the eye, then how in the world did it come about?
It was originally developed from a cornea.
Intentionally developed from a cornea?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not...
As a technological innovation.
Technological innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't,
as I understand it, that's what I read anyway.
Like everybody has a cornea, let's put another cornea on top, and then we'll take both of those corneas and give them to the next guy.
No.
So this nictitating lens was actually a technological development from a cornea.
Mm-hmm.
And that is ceremoniously passed.
Right.
To each generation, or each second or third generation.
Right.
As time.
Right.
Okay.
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 And that's why some of the eyes, too, depending upon the growth rate of the JRod, some of the eyes were more observable as having a nictitating membrane, given the size change from birth. Some were fit properly, some don't.
Okay.
And yet they're given the membrane from their particular numerical group.
Numerical group.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And it's, like I said, it's a social convention, but it's one that has good use given their living quality. They live in very low light environments. Now, I think we're probably going to move to the IgA monoclonal gammopathy of uncertain
Not yet.
significance. Yes, we are.
No,
Yes.
no, not yet. You mentioned an irregularity of the feet.
Mm-hmm.
You were discussing feet. I wanted to go back to that before we left, because the cocaine syndrome forced them forward slightly. And
Lurching forward.
And it changed the foot structure.
Yes, the heel, for instance, underneath the heel thickened and almost appears like a bony protuberance under the heel, and that was actually an environmentally pressured event because of their stance, because they're lurching forward with the cocaine-like stance, or the praying mantis so-called stance.
And so it actually was an adaptation to give them more stability, I guess.
Right. There is something I ought to say politically, socially. This is not going to come as a shock to anyone, that human beings lie. And so do the 45s.
Yeah.
What they do as part of their entrainment with their victims, undergoing the abductions, is they have the person actually arrange it where the person will focus upon their skin.
Yeah.
They don't have such gross distensions of the skin, because the infections involving the tubuloacinar
The glands.
involved with the neuropathy aren't that prominent at the 45 stage, but yet they get people to focus upon that. And the reason why they were doing that, why they've done that, is to actually try to hand the blame off for the majority of the abductions on the 52s.
So
In other words, they're lying, they're playing dirty.
they're playing dirty. They were trying to shift the blame.
Yes, because people that would see the 52s, those inside of Majestic that would see the 52s would automatically look at the quality of the skin and observe what they're hearing from the abduction cases and say, it must be the 52s that are doing a lot of these abductions, because that's what people are talking about. They're talking about these unusual little bumps and this scaly type of an appearance. So they lie.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they're not exactly the upstanding.
No. No,
Citizenry,
they
as
feel
it
they
were.
feel that a disaster, a catastrophic timeline, would justify them as a race.
It would play to what they want.
Yes.
So they're not they don't have our best interests at heart.
Oh no. Oh no, not at all.
Whereas the present plus 52,000-year-old group is a much different group.
Yes, and they are actually naturally wavering back toward a philosophical path, but it's just not accepted within their society as of yet.
Right.
So they're gradually moving back toward a philosophical Orion type.
They're
pathway.
the ones that are nicknamed or called the Federation.
Federals.
Federals.
Yeah.
Thank you, Federals. There's
Yeah.
the Orion, the Federals, and then the
Rogues.
Rogue group, the P45s, which are the Rogue group, that have been the ones who have been taking people against their will, doing the abductions.
Yep. Myself included, as it turns out.
Yeah.
On to the diseases.
Yes.
First one I thought I would cover would be the immunoglobulin A
Yeah.
monoclonal gammopathy of uncertain or unknown significance. This condition in the 52, I'm going to speak strictly now involving the JRod to which we were given stewardship or assistance. It falls short of what we would consider a malignant myeloma situation, although there is a small increase in plasmacytosis. We've got a larger number of plasma cells that are active, kicking out this IgA.
IgA is?
It's an antibody. There are certain antibodies called IgA, IgM, IgE, things like that, and they have different specificities toward different antigens.
Okay.
Okay. Oftentimes they have a tail and two heads. They've got FAB and FC type chains, and they're also termed heavy and light chains. And what they do is they attach to antigens, to foreign bodies.
Okay.
So we had a whole ton of IgA being produced. Normally within the body, the highest subfraction of immunoglobulin would be IgM, for instance. Okay. We did repeated tests on the JRod for immunoglobulins, and the IgA continued to be high. The physician on staff ordered biphosphonate therapy because the biphosphonates actually downregulate osteoclast activity, and they, along with cytokines, actually press for or would cause plasma cell apoptosis, in other words, the death of the plasma cells. Now, we found this infection, if you will, this condition, was directly associated immunologically with the polyneuropathy, with the reduction of the synapses that we had distally and symmetrically on the JRod. We did a number of paraprotein tests, a number of M protein detection tests, and they all popped positive for an IgA type of monoclonal hemopathy. The three IgA kappa para protein bands were present during in the fast gamma region for our findings. So that told us that in fact we were dealing with a true IgA malady. They didn't want to go this direction when I first came into the program. They were still looking at the fusions of the chromosomes.
The chromosomes, and they were looking at us as a genomal problem.
It is a genomic problem. They were trying to relate that directly to the incidence of the cocaine-like symptoms and the polyneuropathy.
Okay.
But I said that we needed to take more of a biochemical approach, more of an immunological approach to it, and we would probably have a little better result.
Right.
To that type of an intervention. In fact, the biphosphonates actually helped, but only for a short period of time. And the thing is we were not allowed to do, by the convention in there, any bone marrow work.
Why?
And, we were never really told. We were just told that you cannot work on their bone marrow. So while we could have had a physician, one of the staff physicians in there, actually do a bone marrow biopsy, it was not allowed.
Okay.
So we assume that it was not a multiple myeloma type condition, but we don't know for sure.
No. Okay.
These bands that showed up, the kappa paraprotein type bands that showed up, were, give us a relative abundance, if you will, a relative proportion of the varieties of the immunoglobulins, the antibodies which were present, and it pointed right at IgA, and it pointed to me at least right at multiple myeloma. Mm-hmm. But yet we were consistently and constantly steered away.
Okay.
So I believe that it was, like I said, a CIDP, a chronic immune demyelinating polyneuropathy, because demyelination was also a symptom of this disease. Yeah. The dendrites would be basically degraded, and Wallerian type of a regimen, the byproducts of that degradation would be cleaned up by the immune cells which were present.
Right.
And so, as the dendrites were dying, as these little neural ends, if you will, little neural filaments were dying, the immune system was right there to clean them up, like a vacuum cleaner cleaning up popcorn off them, right?
Off the floor.
Off the floor.
Like that.
Mm-hmm. That neuropathy affected hands. It affected feet, and it caused numbness in the hands and feet, loss of dexterity. You were doing that,
yeah,
exactly.
Dexterity.
So it was loss of dexterity, also intense pain. And when the samples were removed all the way from the lower forearm up into the biceps muscle around the brachioradialis, it caused intense pain to the JRod to remove the samples. And one of the, there's no free lunch in taking a sample from a JRod, because when he's feeling the pain, he is projecting, they naturally project via the telepathy when it comes to autonomic type or pain type responses. And so anything which would be an automatic response,
a knee-jerk,
if you will, right, you're going to feel it.
Oh, boy.
So when I worked on his right arm, I made sure to have a hold of his right arm with my right arm, but I actually worked with the pin system, the pressurized injection system, to pull that a little tiny sample out, little micro sample out. I worked with my left hand doing it so that my left hand wouldn't shake because of the pain hitting my right arm. So I had to do it left-handed when I was working on his right arm rather than right-handed, even though I'm naturally right-handed, because the pain would incapacitate my right arm. So it was, as I said, no free lunch and taking a sample from a JRod. We found also, well, we didn't find this, the Cockayne syndrome was actually known when we walked in there, because they were working on that almost explicitly. The ERCC6 and ERCC8 CSA and CSB system was basically turned on for the Cockayne syndrome, and that also caused photosensitivity.
Okay.
So part of their working in the low light environment, they reacted to that over evolutionary time. The eyes became larger.
Right.
Because of the necessity,
to gather in more light because there was less of it available.
It was gradually selected in, if you will, and however, the movement in the species toward having the Cockayne type syndrome also then added onto them the sensitivity to light.
So then when light became available, it was not just simply available, it was painful.
Right. And it followed an autosomal recessive type of a pathway.
Okay.
If you're going to get into Mendelian genetics. That's interesting. There was somebody on the web that said, I've never spoken about genetics. So I'm not going to refer to Gregor Mendel every day of my life and make everybody happy.
No.
But so what this did is it also made the inability for repair of the DNA, therefore transcriptional problems, transcription problems in the DNA of the JRod. So it made the JRod a little more susceptible to other infections. The word was opportunistic that went out of the old brain of mine.
Opportunistic, as opposed, right.
Yeah, I cross-referenced finally over to HIV, and then I thought about the
Opportunistic infection.
Yeah.
Okay.
The strange thing about this ERCC8, we were using this, and ERCC6 is it actually stands for excision repair, cross-complementing, rodent repair deficiency, complementation group 6, and complementation group 8. That's how these genes are actually named. The CSB from 6 that we found, the ERCC6, I'll just call it 6. The CSB actually caused transcription repair failure, and that was a repair failure which prevented RNA polymerase from taking care of some of the mutations in the genetic complement. And it was found out on chromosome 10, position 11, just as we expected. And the 8 was found on chromosome 5, position 12.1. So the positions were actually held the same on 8 and 5.
Okay.
They were held the same for diagnostic purposes. However, they were probably in a different position because of the fusions.
Relative.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And that would hold for number 5, for position 5, which was the 6, ERCC6. So that would hold for chromosome number 5. That it was held in the same position, but actually fitting in a different numerical number because of the fusions. The one on number 10 was in the same position exactly, on the chromosome position exactly. So they lurched forward. They had the praying mantis type, almost progeria-like appearance.
Okay.
And that's where that praying mantis, those tales come from people who are actually, being abducted and
seeing it firsthand.
And seeing it firsthand. In fact, during the 45s, during the latter portion of the 45s, now I say 45 as if it's one group, there were multiple interjections of that timeline from 45,000 ahead of us, and in 1,000 years, a lot of things change.
Yes.
And during the latter portion of that group, they were already starting to get the Cockayne-like syndrome. The eyes were getting larger in the plus 24s, for instance, the Roswell type era
Right.
incident exposures with these little people. But they were still very much regular human beings, just very diminutive.
Diminutive humans, more childlike appearance.
Mm-hmm.
The eyes showing some of the whiteness that
Yes,
we
the sclera.
have, the sclera that we
Sure,
have.
they still have that, a very apparent.
So that was the plus 24,000 years.
Right. This is a lot of time passing.
Yes.
And yet human beings evolve fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the evolution, again, of our brains that I mentioned just yesterday, the rapid evolution and the specificity, the type of evolution of our brains, argues for fast evolution. It doesn't move through gradualism.
No.
It's truly, Gould is very correct, or was very correct, the late Dr. Gould, in arguing for punctuated equilibrium. Leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And life will burst through any wall.
And with the pressure, environmental stressors,
Mm-hmm.
and the cognizance of the people, probably intentionally selecting for certain features and certain capacities.
Some of it was artificially selected by virtue of their social structure. Those that couldn't keep up were relegated to pools who would not carry their genes on.
Right, because
all the
people
marriages
have
are arranged, and
all the
the
marriages.
mating groups are all arranged.
Yeah.
I hesitate to use the word marriage,
Marriages.
but essentially that was beginning to come back as in the 52s, the feeling of a cohesive unit, a marital unit, but it's generally considered a mating group that they were put in.
A mating group,
Yes.
as opposed to simply a couple or a pair.
Usually it would not go over two females per male.
Okay, so
That's
it
what I
would be-
learned from Kaila, yet he had only had one female himself as part of a mating unit.
Okay.
What I ought to mention about the birth process.
Was there anything else that we wanted to go over before we moved into that area?
Well, I mean,
Birth.
we're going to go into the neuropathy itself, but we're
We
talking about their
Might as well just, okay, keep moving that way then.
their particular hip structures, if you will, the pelvic bones, ilium ischium, they are extremely rolled to the supine, rolled forward, such that vaginal birth is not possible without first breaking the hip bones. So they would have via a heat unit, laser unit, actual surgery to have the hip bones broken prior to birth for the baby to then be born.
And then they would be
Refused.
refused. And,
Refused. And that is one of the selections which have bothered them in their population numbers.
making their population not grow as
Exactly.
quickly.
It makes it very difficult for a population to grow when you know you have to have your hips broken just to have a baby.
Right. This,
There's nerve damage that goes along with it. And
right. It's not really feasible to do a cesarean because of the way that the abdominal organs are located.
Exactly, because the baby was actually located more toward the spinal
And
direction rather than
toward the front. So
toward the
there,
front, yeah.
there would be a great deal of viscera and
Yes.
small intestines.
Well,
and
the way
colon
the way
and
the intestines are set up around the uterine area is that there's a lot of fusions of the organs, like I mentioned about the cardiovascular
Yeah.
system. Well, these organs are fused around that, so it was almost impossible to get via a cesarean section at the baby without cutting through small intestine. And if you run into that sort of a thing, you run into high numbers of peritonitis
Yes.
in the mothers, and a higher death rate of the delivering mother. And they're in a situation where the vast, even though we tried cyclosporin A, I believe it was, the vast majority of antibiotics are dysfunctional
For them.
for them. So they're in a situation where there's a higher death rate anyway because of infection. And see, they're so far ahead of us. I've heard people argue, well, they're so far ahead of us, they must have all of these wonderful, wonderful things. No. And I can say no if we go that direction. I believe that we could have all of these wonderful innovations, scientific innovations, if we move in the direction that we should move by not basically destroying ourselves. But that is not what we're discussing here.
No.
We're discussing a timeline here that we don't want to happen.
We're discussing a visitor from a timeline
Exactly.
that we're desperately trying to avoid having come true.
Yes. As part of our linear timeline, yes.
Right. Trying to sidestep it, as it were, and to advance humanity as a unified humanity, and not, as I sometimes try to express it, it's not the best expression of it, but you come to essentially like a fork in the road. There's a point at which, after that point, you're moving in different directions, and it's like shooting a projectile. A very small deviation here can be a mile or two deviation by the time you come to a target. It's that particular point of crux in our timeline where, past which, we're on a different path. We want to get past this crux point where we don't split off and deviate, even though it wouldn't be visible right away.
We're going to reach that time, and as Yogi Berra said, when you reach the fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
We're going to, as a species, take the fork in the road. Whether we take it toward
here,
what we've been discussing as being a linear reality to us,
right,
or whether it is somehow adjusted, I would have to say by Almighty God, because I don't know how else paradoxes work. Hopefully be adjusted in such a way where we could not only help these JRods, but also at the same time not have them being our own future.
right. Move,
I would
into the future a little differently.
Exactly, and that's why you're going to see, once we pass this point, it's not a day, it's not December 21st, 2012.
No.
Okay, fine, give or take a calendrical change here or there, Gregorian or other calendrical change here or there, it's right around that time. Meaning year before, year after, right in that time we're actually passing up through that energetic, well, we're starting to now.
We're in the process of it
Yes.
now. I mean, we're approaching it.
And the
But
Grand
it's
Cross
a-
is being erected.
It's a time frame.
Exactly. It's a matter of physics. A time frame meaning a matter of physics. It's not a calendar issue.
Right.
We've joked that maybe the calendar ended because the guy who was picking and chipping away at the calendar fell off the side of the pyramid, and then they kind of looked and said, "Okay, it ends right there." I think the precession of the equinoxes was is a little bit more defined, and they did a little better job than that. But it means the same thing. It's not the calendar. It's a matter of physics. It's a time frame, and in that time frame, that matter of physics will and has been influencing us. Look at what's going on with the energetics involving this last hurricane season.
Well, that's a right in your face expression of it right there. We've got more named hurricanes in one year than is, I think, ever We've got more Category 5s in one season than I think ever. And we're not expecting it to get any better any sooner.
One person actually wrote me an email lately and said, I remember a comment on the internet a few years ago where it said that you, in 1991, said that in 2005 the Atlantic conveyor would begin to fail.
Yes.
And it came back to me and he said, you were right, because it's determining that it's beginning to slow now.
Well,
it's nothing that I take any pleasure in at all, but that's approximately the time frame when I calculated if we would continue the anomalous and aberrant loading of carbon into our atmosphere, that in fact it would begin to fail because of the melting of Arctic ice and
the desalination of the ocean water.
As soon as you desalinate it, it's over. It will stop because it will stop drawing.
Right, because of the differential weight and densities of the water won't keep pushing it forward like it should. Well, they've even said that several scientists have commented that they've been taking measurements, and people are just not listening, but it is slowing now.
Right. Well, in 1991, when I mentioned this at the Clark County Planetarium, I had 3 scientists get up and go, ah! And they walked out. Chances are they're the ones that are writing the reports now, finding about the Atlantic conveyor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the way it works.
But the thing we were talking about that I think a lot of people have missed the point. The natural Stargate versus the man-made Stargate. I mean, Stargate is a generic term. It's a term it's easiest to use because a lot of people recognize the term. But we're talking about essentially devices which can be used to create an artificial Einstein
a device which can harbor or connect to the natural wormholes
that exist naturally,
whatever they truly are. Again, I'm not a physicist.
We're using again another generic term.
Now, if we do not have them turned on or put together here on Earth, we will not be drawing energy from our own star when the time that our own star, the sun, actually passes through the higher energetic areas. Why do you think they were called stargates?
Yeah. The thing that a lot of people have been commenting about, and I think it's worth bringing up just briefly, is that there are natural, quote-unquote, stargates that exist. There are, and they've always...
So-called vortices where...
Now, when we bob up through this area of energetics, those will naturally function. There will be a certain amount of energy that is aimed right into our planet, but it's a natural amount that our planet is supposedly able to handle.
It will flow through. It's kind of the difference between a bird on an electrical wire, where the energy will pass naturally through the bird
and back into the water.
And back into the wire, because it's passing through the wire as well that the bird is standing on. But if you clip the wire between the 2 feet of the bird, then all of the energy will pass through the bird, and you will have one very exploded bird.
Right.
Well, what it's doing is it's allowing, if we do not perturb it, it's allowing the natural energy to flow through us, flow through our world, without directing it to ground.
Right. But if we tip the balance and think that we're smarter than we are,
then we're going to die.
Then we're going to overload the system, and that, in my understanding, is what is going to be the thing that pushes us into the cataclysmic areas.
Yes, 2/3 of the human race.
That we don't want to go there. So that's been one of the big issues, is to try to make sure that all of these artificial constructions
Mm-hmm.
are completely disassembled and not available
Right.
for the energetics.
And that's one of the reasons, not the only reasons, but one of the reasons why we disassembled Saddam Hussein's government.
Yes, exactly.
He often spoke about having a key, if you will, some sort of a gem or whatever that would access great power.
Mm-hmm.
And he's handing these things out like they were party favors around the Middle East, Northern Africa, and even into Russia and China. The Russians have taken care of what they needed to take care of, and hopefully the Chinese have. We believe that we've got mutual understanding with that.
Cooperation there.
And the ones that he handed off to Northern Africa, the particular person to whom he handed 2 of these units, or at least plans for them, I believe the units themselves, though, as I understand, was approached and basically told, we will make you the most popular dude that you can ever be in Libya. You will be richer beyond avarice. Just hand these over and we're going to turn you into a hero. Don't worry about Lockerbie. Don't worry about those bombing situations. We're going to make you rich beyond avarice. We'll take care of you. And he said, oh, sure, no problem. And he handed them over, and now he's just lauded up and down the, I think he's even, his country is even participating now as one of the human rights adjudicators for the UN.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Muammar had more of a brain in his head than what a lot of people gave him credit for. He knew to hand them over immediately, that or we were going to take him over. We were going to enter in by force and take it.
Well, there's no other way for us to get through this this event that's coming, unless we simply allow the natural ones that exist to exist without any additions on our part. And if we can manage, this is one of the biggest things that we have been working on to try to get under containment. And I believe that we are winning this battle.
I believe we are as well.
But it's going to take constant vigilance. And it's not, the battle's not over simply because we think that we're winning. It's going to take constant vigilance. This is why I say that we're working so very, very hard to try to make sure that the catastrophe that could happen somehow gets averted.
Exactly.
And a lot of people have been misunderstanding that.
And that 2/3 of humanity might go in an instant. It might go over a period of 100 years. But it would ultimately, according to the timeline that they know, the JRods know and the Orions know, it would ultimately cost 4 billion lives. Now, I'm willing to work day and night to prevent that.
Which is why we have been working day and night.
That's right. It's called busting your hump over something that's more important than anything else that you can possibly imagine. The future of humanity. The polyneuropathy. I mentioned that it was CIDP-like. It was CIDP, chronic immune demyelinating polyneuropathy. It was also MGUS involved in a chronic immune demyelinating polyneuropathy. You have the component, the immunoglobulin component to it. We had denervation of the skin, which caused 3 things. It caused there was an associated cystic reaction around the compound tubuloacinar antifreeze protein generating miracrine glands.
So they became cystic.
And there were cysts around it, and so there was less of the AFGP that was produced, and so we had a thermal. Well, it went to a low body temperature, hypothermia. It was
they were unable to hold their thermal balance.
Right, and so they went hypothermic, and Actually, many of the deaths occur from hypothermia as well as associated edema.
The edema would have an effect upon their cardiopulmonary.
Oh yeah, they basically drowned in their own fluids.
Became like COPD.
Right.
Yeah.
Dysesthesia with myalgia. They had pain, tingling, unusual sensation, and numbness. Then we had our inflammatory cells, the plasma cells, which were running awry on us, which I believed was associated to a myeloid series problem in the bone marrow, probable malignant multiple myeloma. However, we were unable to go there. We were not allowed to go there for some reason. And that's part of the problem. You get told to solve a problem, and they don't give you all of the damn information.
Yeah.
And they don't let you have access to all of the information.
Yeah.
We had a fibroblast infiltration to these neuropathy associated the Wallerian type degeneration, and what we found is that where the neuropathy actually was extant histologically while we were looking at it, we found fibroblast infiltration in that area, and that probably had to do with a release of PGE2 and maybe a localized pickup of the immune system, a small release of prostaglandins, because you get that with the fibroblasts and fibrocytes. So we had a decrease in tumor necrosis factor and things like that. And the loss of the miracrine, maybe I should say what a miracrine.
Yeah, go ahead and kind of explain what some of the terms mean.
Two different types of glandular secretion, miracrine and apocrine.
Right.
In a miracrine glandular secretion, you have vesicles containing the secretory product, which rove out to the outer membrane of the cell, fuse with the outer membrane of the cell, and then there is an opening up of the secretory product into a lumen of a gland, of a duct gland, a duct-bearing gland, as opposed to a endocrine system, ductless. They were gradually moved off and away from their ducts, evolutionary-wise. In an apocrine system, you actually have a tearing off of the cytoplasm, and the product and the cytoplasm, the secretory product and the cytoplasm, would then both flow off into the duct area as the secretion. In this case, this was a miracrine type secretion of an AFGP.
Okay.
And the statement about compound tubuloacinar, anybody who knows about glands will know what I'm talking about morphologically.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Everybody else can just either, ask or look it up or whatever.
Now, the fibroblasts were probably, the fibroblast infiltration was probably associated with modulation of interleukin 10 and 12. We weren't really sure at the time. The tests which we were doing, specifically the radio immune precipitation tests, they told us that it was probably interleukin 10, interleukin 12 that was going on, but it was difficult to pin down because the fibroblast infiltration was scant, and where it might be occurring here in the biceps, it's not occurring here in the brachioradialis muscle innervation area. So we weren't really sure at the time that our portion of the project was ended. Now we did our xenografts, and in fact the biphosphonate therapy and the xenografts together were the two best palliative type therapies or treatments.
Now we're talking about the xenografts and the fact that the grafts themselves were not fully accepted.
Right.
You might want to go into that just a tiny bit.
Well, we were doing not only just grafts from present-day human to the JRod, but also using that reversing type aminohexylpurine.
Yeah.
The 2,6-disubstituted purine. to basically halt the normal progression of the cell. It was in like a GO state, and we de-differentiated the neurons, and then re-differentiated the neurons, and then did the grafting.
The grafting back.
And that's what was going on at the time. And some of this differentiation of the neurons, we were also doing transfections with that to get those neurons to produce higher levels of whatever gene expression that we wanted.
Right.
And in this case, it was a higher level of a gene expression for its own protection, its own antigenic determination.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were trying to get it to myelinate.
No, well, the Schwann cells that we had absolutely no success at all with any of the myelin issues. None.
Okay, I wasn't sure on that.
None. That was as bad as what they're dealing with today with multiple sclerosis. It's
Okay.
The demyelinating disorder it was beyond what we could do.
Okay.
But what we were doing is we were specifically infecting these neurons that had been de-differentiated and then re-differentiated, so that they would scream out to the body, "I'm me." And so that the body may not react against it. And that gave us our best opportunity at repair, but it only gave us a palliative window of a few months. And then there was a re-exacerbation of the disease process, of the pathology, and ultimately he was back in the same state that he was before.
Okay.
Now, if anybody can figure out a better way of dealing with this,
Yeah.
many people ask, I've heard them asking, why would they come back in time
To get help from
to get help from us?
us, because we obviously don't know as much as somebody from the future. I've heard that argument.
Yeah, and that argument is based, what sounds good on the surface, but is based in a utopian philosophy.
Yeah.
And of course, the utopia stands for nowhere.
Non-existent, nowhere.
We're more closer to Omelas than we are utopia.
Yes.
But they've specifically come back to speak to us, whether or not they survive from their neuropathy, but to speak to us concerning the fork in the road that we will take, that we are taking right now. We're in the middle of the fork in the road. And that is the great message, which is coming from the future to us. A message of warning and a message of hope. The message of warning has to do with what they are to themselves, what we could become. The message of hope is that we have the necessary information in our hands and the necessary projection of force where required to prevent that reality from occurring.
So here we are in the fork of the road, and they're saying you could lean this way.
Yes.
You could lean this way.
Yes.
If you lean this way, there's hope. If you lean this way, you're probably going to be us
Yes.
in the future.
If you lean this way, there is hope, but no free lunch.
No free lunch.
If you lean this way, then you are looking into the eyes of your future.
And that's really the message.
That is the great message of this. Not a message of doom and gloom, a message of great hope.
Great hope.
And that's the message which I want ultimately carried to the public, because that is the true message. I'm not a cataclysmic, doom and gloom type person. I believe in hope. If I didn't believe in the hope, I wouldn't be setting my derriere here in this chair talking with you right now about this.
No, and you wouldn't have been working so feverishly for so long to try to prevent the misuse and the proliferation of all of those external extraneous stargates.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have worked so hard.
And everybody else around us inside of Majestic wouldn't have been either.
Either. No, nobody would have been working as hard.
There are people working 24 hours, 24/7 about right now
Yes.
on the project. The assistance to the JRod, while it would have offered or would offer to them in their culture assistance, it more offered to us an understanding of how evolutionary pathways can go.
Yeah.
It's the learning that we took from it, where the central feature of the project in which I was involved was what we were learning from it for us, rather than actually to help them, even though helping them may have been a consequence of our behavior,
Yeah.
of our research. And he gave of himself willingly just on that basis. He knew that full well.
Yeah.
He's quite a guy. Quite a guy indeed. We're dealing with 45s, we're dealing with 52s. And the Orions are 52s as well. Where are the 46s, the 47s, the 48s?
48s.
The first ones to come to us were those of the 45s and the 52s. The treaties were established with them as a consequence. And the other timelines, their futures, and even, for instance, 44 down to 24,
20,
right,
yeah.
are by treaty unable to travel in time.
By treaty.
By treaty. Now, does that mean they never did? I don't know. Rules. Human beings tend, whether you are here now, or 45,000 years from now, human beings tend to bend and break rules.
You think?
And they do so then as well.
Yes, because there has been discussion about the fact that 45s, for example, didn't just come back and visit us.
No. There are, I'm aware from information obtained not that long ago, that there are in fact other extraterrestrial aliens of non-human lineage. However, they are not interested in having discussions with Majestic, the United Nations, or any of the associated governments. Whether certain representatives of non-human lineage extraterrestrials, true aliens, whether they have contacted other individuals in our population, both now and in our history, or even into our future. I presume that probably something like that has at least happened. However, I have no direct data on it. The only direct data that I've been provided was, in fact, they are willing to speak with the Orions, the 52,000 year ahead of us Orions, and have them do the brokering of discussions, but they won't deal with us directly. The reason being is that literally we are too warlike.
When you discuss the Orions, we haven't really talked too much about them. As I understand it, that there was there could be a separation of humanity, one portion of humanity going towards Zeta Reticula, and the other portion of humanity going in a different direction. Now the Orions, as you've described them, are actually of human descent as well.
Yes.
But having gone a different route.
Yes. After the, God forbid, the catastrophe.
That we're trying to avert.
I can't say that, enough times, but.
Exactly.
A certain portion of the human population took the higher avenue, the higher route, if you will, the higher moral course, and stayed out on the surface of the earth. The others who went underground ended up becoming the JRods. Those that stayed above the underground facilities fairly quickly reoriented themselves here on Earth with technology, moved off to the moon, ultimately then to Mars, and then off to Orion. And the JRods stayed here until they perfected their technology to such a state where they ventured toward reticulum.
Now, the brokerage, as you mentioned, the Orions are a more philosophical and more esoteric
Yes.
group of people, and
Yes.
they're from the same general time frame, the same 52,000 years into our future,
Yes.
as the 52,000 P52 JRod group. But they have a completely different philosophy, a completely different view
Yes.
of things. Now, they're more peace-oriented. They would be brokering.
A more balanced approach to logic versus emotion. They can apply logic as well as emotion, whereas the majority of the JRods are very logical, very numerological. I only know so much about the Orions.
Right. This is what I was getting at, because you had a little bit of experience
Very little.
with them. Can you describe them?
Oh, sure. The two representatives that I saw at the T9 were slightly, well, if they would be standing up, probably slightly taller than we. Heads occupying approximately the same ratio to torso for an adult human. Hair was blonde, eyes were blue, very bright blue, and again, their eyes were slightly larger than normal. They almost look like a doll, if you will, some of the children's toys that are out, or a caricature, and they were very pretty looking.
Did they speak? Did they use telepathy?
That was totally by telepathy, and I did not hear. I heard one comment, I believe, which would have come from the Orion being, but I'm not certain who was translating for whom there at the time. I didn't know enough about the setup having to do with the T9 treaty and the particular arrangements of who would be translating for whom when I entered in there.
Okay.
I was there for one reason and one reason only.
And the last question, to clarify, was there any life support needed for the Orions?
Yes.
And
yes,
what kind of life support?
Oh, I have no clue. They were inside of a stroller.
Again,
I have no idea what the atmosphere was.
So they needed some type of atmospheric support?
Some type, but I'm not certain if it was much different than our normal atmosphere or not. I am aware that during the time when Eisenhower encountered them, that they were free in our environment, but I think that freedom is limited by time. They can exist in our normal environment for only a certain amount of time.
When I say atmospheric support, I'm actually saying it probably wrong, because they wouldn't need atmospheric support in their own environment. It's just that being in our environment could be stressful.
Yeah, I believe that would be the case because they were in strollers.
Yeah.
So that's the only information I have, though.
Okay, thank you.
I could guess.
No, it's just curious what you could share from memory.
They wore all white jumpers, and that's it. Aside from what I've shared, they appeared to have 5 digits on each hand, but the hands looked different. The length of the center digit and the index finger appeared to be longer, as opposed to the pinky, but they appeared to have 5 digits when I saw one of their hands move. Aside from that, that's it.
Okay.
Did you see any other ships with the respective ones?
Having to do with the T9 now. However, I'm aware that the the variety of ship that you showed for the cutaway version, the one that we spoke about with Mark, was in fact an Orion craft. That in fact is the type or variety of craft that the 52 Orions use. That was not a JRod craft. The JRod crafts are the 52s use the so-called sport model.
Okay.
I hate putting it that way, even, but I mean that is a
more of a-
Lazarism, but the sport model, and then the 45s, as well as the 24s to a certain extent, but they were different. Use the triangular planforms. And
There's many stories about a mothership. Do you know anything about motherships for these
No.
scout ships?
no, I've never heard anything about that aside from like popular movies. And, no.
We might want to take a minute and talk about, instead of mothership, you might want to talk for a moment about Gliese and the fact that there is
We're
a...
almost out of time.
Oh,
yeah,
we're
well,
getting...
there's a base
There is
in
a
the
base.
Aquarius system, and that's where the name of the Aquarius project came from. Was actually their basing.
So it's not a mothership per se, but it's within a reasonable jump.
15 light years or so.
15 light year jump for here. So
Mhm.
that's not too far with their capacity.
No. That's where they're based in real time near us.
And it's a cooperative base.
Yes.
Yes.